Thank you very much. I will, as you said, present about fermented product from my region, so Bourgogne and Franche-Comté, and the impact on the question of typicity of products and of course of climate change. So that was the demand of the organizer, and I hope my presentation will be good for them. And I thank you very much for inviting me to present. So first of all, I wanted to present the region. So as you see, Région Bourgogne-Franche-Comté is here, in the opposite border was here, and in red you've got Région Bourgogne-Franche-Comté. It's in the eastern part of France, near the Swiss border. And I want, well, it's very famous for wine and for cheese. And I will begin with cheese after the presentation by Michel, and then speak about wine also. So as you see on the right part of the screen, the map of cheese in France, you see that the Bourgogne-Franche-Comté is a region of high density of cheese. And I will speak with one example of Comté, which is a very famous and important cheese in the French products. So Comté, it looks like that. It is a cooked pressed cheese, and it is so a big cheese weighing 40 kilos. And for 40 kilos, you need 400 liters of milk. And for that, you need 20 cows. But with the appellation of Comté, you have a lot of constraints of production. And for each cow, you need 1 hectare. And so this is the first thing. And then the second thing is that you cannot make your own Comté. You have to share the production of Comté, and it's a share between different producers, and it's a cooperative cheese. And as you see on the picture, it is made on a mountainous part of Jura, the mountain of Jura. And so once you have this cheese, you macerate it in the cellars, and it lasts at least 4 months, but it's usually between 9 and 20 months. And now the consumer demands sometimes 3 or 4 years. But there are a lot of constraints to produce Comté, about grass, about the stabilization of milk, about the conservation of milk, and about the production itself. And all is made as if there was a very big impact of microorganisms. But still, the studies have not proved that, because it's very difficult to prove. And I just wanted to show you a recent study about that. So the recent study was to find a link between the microbial specificity and the localization of the production, so the terroir effect. And so this is the map of the mountain of Jura. And so between the low altitude here and the highest altitude here, so the mountain is not very high, it's only 1,687 meters, the highest place. But you have production at different levels. And so the different spots are where the sampling have been made. And with the different samplings, my colleagues from l'Institut Agro-Dijon in ecology have analyzed the microorganisms at the different levels. So in the soil, in the plants, in the cottage, and in the milk. It stopped at the milk level. And so they found a significant correlation between soil and plants, between plants and coated and then on milk. So there was really an impact of all the development on the microorganism in the milk. They also saw that when you change the environmental conditions, the herd management and the grassland management, you can change those transfers of microorganisms between soil and milk. And especially the effect of pH was important, of coated care, that can be obvious, and of fertilization and grazing pressure. Grazing pressure is, do you put the cows in spring, in summer, in spring and summer, and so it will change the grassland. And so they used that to validate the terroir notion, but this is still very preliminary, and to be sure that there is an effect on the cheese, there's still something lacking. And the thing lacking is that when you use milk, you don't know, they didn't study the microorganisms in the cheese. And especially when they studied the microorganism here, they only rarely saw microorganisms that you can find in cheese. So mainly lactic acid bacteria. They also did not really observe the development of Clostridium butyricum, which is one of the main alteration species for Comté, and of course not of pathogens, but Comté is not very problematic cheese for pathogens. But all these results together still shows that microorganisms are likely to have an impact on typicity. But still, a lot of things have to be characterized. And then about climate change, as I showed you, there's a lot of impact of environmental conditions, and the climate change in the Jura region, so that's evaluation of the risk in the Swiss Jura, but just near the border. And so we are in this part now, and depending on if we do something or if we don't do anything, the temperature will grow more or less, but there's still an increase in temperature, an increase in dryness that affect species diversity and grass. And the grass deficit is very big in the last years. And in 2018, it was of 44% in Northern Jura. So this is really a problem, and it will obviously have an impact on fermentation and typicity. Just an example of cheese that we can find between, if we go from Dijon to Bordeaux, we will cross France and find Cantal, and in Cantal there's a Salers, which is a very famous and very good cheese. And this cheese has stopped production on August this year because there was no more grass for the cows. And so the cows continue to produce milk, the producer continued to produce cheese, but the cheese was not anymore Salers because it was not possible due to the climate change. So that's an issue that we can find probably in the next year more and more often. So that's really a big problem. And how can we maintain a production with the right taste and the right typicity? It's the question for already for today and for, of course, tomorrow. Then there was also a question about Burgundy wines. So a lot of things are similar to what we can find in Bordeaux. So maybe I can go quicker for that. But Bourgogne is here, the wine production. Chablis also belongs to Bordeaux, and Jura has a specific wine, sometimes with the same grapes, and but with a very different taste. Also interesting, but very different. So there's a big diversity of taste, a big typicity of taste. So that's the production, the wine area in Burgundy. And I will mainly speak about Côte de Nuit here. And this is the map here. So I just focused on the area from where I'm speaking today, and here in Vougeot. And there's about 10 kilometers between Gevrey-Chambertin and Nuit-Saint-Georges. And you have many different appellations. In red, that's the most important, the highest cost wines. And then in brown, the lower cost. But every wine in Burgundy is expensive. And here you have, for instance, Romanée Conti, which is very, very expensive. And in this area, you have maybe 10 of the 15 or the 50 most expensive wines in the world. So this is something with very big differences. And how you can find the differences? So this is a picture of this area, for instance. So you see it's very small. And from here to here, you have about 4 colors. But how can you say this is really different? And the typicity is different. So it's not always obvious. Of course, here it's colder and the soil is different and there are many differences of topology. You may have also some differences in microbiology. So that's my field. So I will speak about that. But microbiology, you can find the microorganisms from the grapes, from the leaves. And then you can find microorganisms in the processing, in the cellars. And all that will act on the fermentation, but the effect is still very difficult to characterize. From my experience, when you go to one producer, even if he has wines from different area here, you have a specific taste from a typicity from the producer and not only from the different places. But still, so there's probably an effect on processing, but it's still difficult to analyze. And my colleagues from the wine department in Dijon, they studied, for instance, the species of yeast that you could find the day before harvesting, then during the wine production. So that was in the air, on the material, on the soil, and on the must. And so you see different families or different species. Of course, during the wine production, it's all yellow. Yellow is the color of Saccharomyces. So it takes the most important part during this time. You also find them in the air. But with the succession of species, it's difficult to say. Maybe one little present species will have an impact on the sensorial properties. And this is still very difficult to find. And the problem is when you use those systems based on species, you won't be able to find the diversity of metabolic properties, because there's a big diversity in the middle of one species, and you should do the study with strains and seeing each activity enzymatic activity of each strain. So that's one thing which is still difficult. In my lab, we work on this effect, trying to find the specificity, the technological specificity of each strain of one species, for instance, and mainly on lactic acid bacteria, but in other part of my labs, we work on yeasts, and non-Saccharomyces yeast are very also important. Then just a few words about climate change, but Michel has already spoken a lot about that. So one specificity in Burgundy was that the summer was often cold. So it meant late harvest, lack of sugar, and addition of sugar sometimes. So it's not always possible due to the regulation, but that's called chaptalization. This is also important in a region northern from Burgundy with the same grapes, so Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. This region is called Champagne, and in Champagne it was impossible to make a good wine because of the cold weather. And so that's why they invented a wine with chaptalization, with a specific recipe. And finally, this wine is maybe the most famous in the world now, the Champagne. But with climate change, so you've got the risk of freezing. That's an image from my village. Every year now, we have this trying to warm the vineyards. And of course, as Michel told, more sugar means more alcohol, and the wine is difficult to keep with the typicity. So there are also solutions trying to find other yeasts with producing less alcohol and more glycerol, for instance. And yes, with climate change, so that's the different climate in France, Aquitaine in Bordeaux. Here it's continental in Dijon, in Mediterranean and oceanic. And the prevision of climate change in the next century, so that was Mediterranean, Aquitaine, oceanic, continental, and you see continental will disappear. Aquitaine will be in the most part of France. Mediterranean will go up to Burgundy, and so on. So all will be different. And that means here is where you could grow grapes now, and we think in 20 years it will be possible to grow almost everywhere except in mountains. And this is grapes from the south, from Bordeaux or the south of France. And now in 20 years, we suppose it will be possible to grow it everywhere. But maybe the grapes from Burgundy will only be possible to be grown in Great Britain, for instance. So there's a big work now on grapes, but also on rootstock, because you can find more resistant rootstock to the climate change. But if I keep on microorganisms, there's also an effect on cellars and on the temperature. So all this condition of climate change means that keeping typicity of wines will be really a great challenge. So thank you for your attention, and thank you.